Hello, dear friends. Today we'll continue exploring the memoirs of a German non-commissioned officer. Don't forget to rate this video and share your thoughts in the comments. And now, let's begin. I recorded the events that took place on the night of May 1st to 2nd. We're still on high alert. I'm sitting in a dugout, writing all night. To my side, a piece of wood is wedged into a hole in the wall's cladding with a candle attached to it. Hanging right there are two reproductions: The Garden of Eden by a Rhineland artist and The Flight into Egypt by Hans Baldung. Some people may be surprised that my voice always sounds so cheerful and energetic when I answer phone calls, and this happens quite often. They're heading forward into the ravine to lay mines. Watch out, don't shoot! An enemy patrol is moving on the left. We're following them. We'll report back as soon as we return. And so it goes on all the time. However, at 6:15 a.m., I naturally answered grumpily. I'd only slept for a quarter of an hour when the call came. Tanks are advancing from the east side of P. Have you spotted them? Go to hell with your tanks, I thought to myself angrily. But into the receiver I said, "Aye, sir," and went back to sleep. I didn't even check the report because it was perfectly clear to me that it was an artillery tractor. And even if it had been a tank, so what? Until it reached the ravine, there was nothing I could do about it. And even if it managed to get through to our position, it would be too late anyway. To hell with it, this tank. A tank? Just think about it. What on earth would it be doing all alone in the woods? If the tank wants to play games with us, let it try. We always have shells at the ready for situations like this, not to mention special mines. Let them just come closer. If you're prepared for danger, it loses its edge. The same goes for any other danger. That's why, I think, the safest place is among the troops on the front lines. The front line is territory that belongs to the soldier. There are no partisans there. Not a single stray civilian would dare approach it. He'd be shot the moment he was spotted. Everything else is clear. I know what awaits me. I can act accordingly. There are tricks, but there are no unknown tricks. This makes the front line the clearest of all zones. The same is true in other respects. The nights are cold. The ground has frozen over again. Snowstorms sweep through the shifting light. But if you fire a pistol at a birch tree, sap will spurt out. Drops of it fall from the branches when a shell knocks splinters from the treetops. I consider the birch an important tree. When I read letters from home, it seems as though the people there think that thinking about this summer and this second winter is unbearable. It is not unbearable. Someone's soul will lose just a little more of its power to soar. We will become more serious and more hardened, distanced from all that is bright. But against the gray backdrop of existence, our dreams have become brighter than they've ever been before. Our lost youth appears to us in radiant beauty, overshadowing everything. The battery next to ours advanced and was redeployed somewhere else. We turned the barrels of our guns. The command post and our left flank observation post are now on the right. But my old observation post, opposite P, remains exactly where it was. The old red command post is holding its ground, putting up stubborn resistance. It feels as if it is the center of everything. I relieved one of the observers from the 10th battery. We set out at 2 in the morning, when a streak of light had already appeared in the east. There was still enough snow for the silhouettes of people and horses to stand out against it. We trotted silently along the road, dusted with fresh snow, galloping through the forest and over the hills toward the front. We came across men from one of our detachments in a small cart. They had just reached for their weapons, but took their fingers off the triggers with relief when we drew level with them. It was still twilight when we stopped at the first stables of N. I sent the horses back. The first bullets whistled past, and we continued on foot. We passed through the communication trenches, past the barbed wire and the ruins of the company command post. Inn is situated quite low along the bank of the Dersha River. It is clearly visible from all sides. The opposite bank, where the remains of the burned-out houses of Post 1 are visible, is somewhat higher. To the left lies P, which I know so well. Now I have a clear idea of what it looks like from behind and from any other angle. Not much remains of N, but a good view opens up from the attic of one of the two remaining houses, and our dugout is perfectly camouflaged among the ruins of the other. The front continues its strange existence. Thunder, rumbling, and explosions can be heard. Shells whistle through the air, ricocheting and exploding. Flashes rise into the sky, white and red, and for a moment the planks and wooden decking became clearly visible in the blinding white, flickering light, allowing me to take a few quick steps and a leap. Then the night grew even darker, and once again I made my way through the wet, slippery trenches. The trenches stretch left and right as far as one can imagine, and in the night you sometimes sense the full extent of the vast front. The dugout is 7 feet wide and 10.5 feet long. Staff Sergeant von Hoven from Allenstein, Strauss, a proud 21-year-old father from Hegau, Feil, a tall, boyish-faced student from Marburg, Litzen, a greedy Silesian, Onishka, a non-commissioned officer from Königsberg, and myself, a lawyer from Frankfurt. We split into 2 groups of 3, forward observers for a howitzer battery and several heavy infantry guns. While one group lies in their bunks, the other has the entire room at their disposal. You might think that under such circumstances, quarrels might arise, or even a proper scandal might break out. However, on the contrary, order is maintained in the dugout thanks to a shared spirit of goodwill, friendly tolerance, and an inexhaustible sense of humor, all of which bring a glimmer of cheerfulness to even the most unpleasant situation. If someone wants to wash up in the tiny nook between the stove and the door, we move the table into the space between the bunks so that one person can still sit at the table. The others stay on their bunks. When 3 of us are eating, the rest sit on the plank beds and watch them. We call the dugout the submarine because it's just as neat. And life in it isn't just any old way. Everything goes well because you'll always hear a joke and laughter is constantly ringing out. It works because the East Prussians, Hessians, Silesians, and Alemanni are good folks. They're all members of one family, and they all show the willpower to make life easier. We share a single life, not so much in terms of its danger, which we hardly ever discuss seriously, but in more universal human matters. These universal aspects came to the fore that evening when Strauss showed a photo of his child, and Onishka showed a photo of his wife. Others know that such things are sacred and inviolable. No matter how rough a man may be, in this moment he becomes calm and serious. Perhaps this is because everyone has in their mind's eye an image of their beloved woman and their home, which they left so long ago and to which they passionately long to return one incredible day, a day that will not come soon. As soon as dawn broke, we launched an attack on the machine gun emplacement that was sweeping the entire valley with sustained fire. While shells from a heavy infantry gun and 3 heavy mortars pounded this position with intense fire, the tracer rounds from our machine gun struck the embrasures of other enemy positions directly. The second shell explosion was followed by a flash. The third sent a human figure reeling. All this lasted only a few minutes, a perfect example of coordinated action. Then, everything quieted down for a while. It became so quiet that we could hear clumps of earth falling into the river. I slept from 5 o'clock until 9. Then 3 of us moved into a new dugout that had been vacated by the forward observation team of the 11th Battery. We swept it out, made it livable, and now, with nothing else to do, we're loitering around the trench. In the afternoon, I did a little sight adjustment. It is now 10 p.m. and night has fallen. 2 of my soldiers went to get fodder. I'll be glad when they return. Around this time, the enemy opens direct fire. At night, I went with Litzen to get water. There's only one well. It's impossible to get near it during the day, and even at night, Ivan keeps a close eye on it. On my first attempt to get water, my bucket sank. There was a slight tug and a splash, and an essential piece of equipment was gone. On the second attempt, the rope got tangled on the well rim. This was bad. We had to do something about it, or we'd be left without water tonight. Litzen was pounding away, half crouched inside the log cabin, cursing like a sailor. He railed against our makeshift bathhouse, the water, and everything else. Every time a flash appeared overhead, we froze. But finally, the job was done. When we were back in the trench, Litzen let out a deep sigh. We checked our watches. We'd been gone an hour and a half. The evening was quiet, with wind and rain mingling with the greenery of the countryside. The Russian children had nailed a piece of wood between 2 trees and tied a rope to it. They'd made a swing. They'd been swinging all day. Their shouts and laughter filled the village street. The children are barefoot, dressed in rags, and covered in mud, but they are happy and healthy. Until evening, one of our guys might join in the fun and help Vanya or Tanya swing even higher. Our soldiers sit on the doorsteps, playing harmonicas and humming into the night. In dugouts, on the cliffs. Later, in the darkness, only the glimmers of cigarette lights are visible here and there. Martin, an ethnologist who has now become an infantry lieutenant, told me in a letter that he takes great pleasure in administering 7 villages, trying to revive agriculture. He says he would enjoy it even more if he weren't certain that he would be sent off to another assignment again. It is true that we hate this country and are fighting against it. It has brought us suffering and homesickness. But it is also beautiful, full of charm and unknown treasures. The NP is located next to the railroad line. The dugout is built into the side of the embankment, weather-beaten, heavy as an alpine cap, and as vast as a ballroom. It is a strange structure. I climbed the embankment and walked up to the observation post along a wooden walkway. Here lies the marsh, the wilderness in all its splendor, and a pool of warm brown sludge where myriads of mosquitoes breed in the sunlight. There are several glossy alder trees that we threw into the swamp to build a small jetty. Then there's a huge anthill and a couple of shell craters that you pass by before stepping onto the platform in the tree, which sways in the wind with a plaintive creak. A small watchtower peeks out, hidden among the tops of 3 fir trees. You give in to the swaying and listen to the cuckoo. Tiny blood-red cones have already appeared on the firs, poking through the greenery. The end of the first year. In early summer 1942, the main German forces were concentrated on the front of the Southern Army Group, where the advance in a new direction toward Maykop and the Caucasus was dictated by Hitler's need for oil. Following the Russians' failed counter-offensive on Kharkiv, the Germans launched an offensive on June 28th, when the 4th Panzer Army, which had by then been redeployed, broke through between the Don and Donets rivers, followed by von Paulus's 6th Army, which had been tasked with capturing Stalingrad and securing the left flank. All of this contributed to the situation in the central sector remaining relatively calm. Nothing significant is happening. In the south, the offensive continues. Here, we still have a chance to catch our breath. Slowly, Step by step, we are shaking off our numbness like a tight suit. Now we realize how blind and numb the winter had made us. It's more than one could have imagined. I walked through a gap at the back of the building toward the observation post, letting the young branches lash at my arms, and stopped for a while in a clearing. A ridge of clouds stretched from the north across the pale evening sky. How vast the sky over Russia is. Day after day, machine gun rounds whistle over our shelter. At night, their whistling echoes sharply through the forest. Nothing happens. Then someone gets up and steps out of the dugout, and a few seconds later, he's already dead. The night was quiet. Only a single burst rang out, but it hit him. You say, "Damn it, he was a good guy." And the next day, you see a wreath made by the guys, with bunches of red fir cones like open wounds. You see his face again, exactly the same as when he stepped out of the dugout. Then it grows dark. Sergeant Brown stopped by our sector for a short while, and today he's leaving us. Brown was in charge of the machine gun squad near my observation post. He kept watch while I slept. Our reports complemented each other. In the evening, I'd pass along to him the music I'd picked up somewhere on the front lines, and neither of us ever drank our schnapps alone. He was an ace who managed to set fire to the dugouts in P and burn down the last sheds. With iron composure, he fired bursts of tracer rounds, leaning against a tree, aiming at a range of 600. Burst after burst at the same spot, until it began to smoke. Yesterday, Brown said, "What, volunteers for patrol duty? I'll pass. I've been out there long enough." But today he was cursing because he hadn't gone out there. At night, they discovered that the Russian firing positions were empty. They passed through the dugouts, and a Russian sentry in the passageway spoke to them, not realizing who was coming. There are other men who make their way through the countryside with rifles slung over their shoulders, their jackets unbuttoned, and their caps askew. There is something in the look in their eyes that sets them apart from everyone else. You recognize them immediately. These are the ones who wage war. They are indomitable. They are everywhere, getting involved in every operation. Danger attracts them. They like to play with death. People like that are rare. They're too fast, too skilled, too determined. They take control of the game and keep it going for a long time. Then, all too often, they break the rules of the game, or they meet a worthy opponent. One sergeant destroyed 28 tanks in close combat. Then he climbed up to the turret of the 29th, armed with nothing but a pistol. He was a second too late. They fired simultaneously, and both were killed. It's hard to get along with such men in the rear, but at the front, if they fall into the hands of a good officer, they can turn a company into a first-rate combat unit, because their fighting spirit and bold decisions rub off on everyone else. Courage and boldness are contagious, just as cowardice is. In the evening, lengthy reports on enemy activity came in. They filled in the picture. We were expecting an attack. It began at 3 a.m. The enemy opened fire with all the means at their disposal, blinding our observation posts, shelling our artillery positions, and concentrating their fire on our bridgehead at R. Almost immediately, the wired communication lines went dead. Word of the attack came over the radio. Reception was poor. We opened barrage fire blindly, guided by the sounds of battle growing louder around R. At dawn, we went outside and watched black smoke from shell explosions at the edge of the forest creeping toward our firing positions. One man was wounded at the artillery positions. About 120 medium-caliber shells fell near the observation post. We opened barrage fire at full strength, firing between 800 and 1,000 rounds, though we actually claimed there were nearly 2,000, half of which were directed at R. Our own losses were minimal, and later the command post reported that the assault on R had been thwarted by our battery's fire. The supply train arrived at 4 o'clock. At 2 p.m., in the rain and snow, we loaded onto the train. A log road led to the railroad station, where there was a temporary loading platform. The bulky Russian rail cars were badly damaged. The locomotive was gigantic. Rain lashed down on the muddy puddles, and the wind howled through the telegraph wires. The gun crews climbed up with mud caked on their hands and chests. But without haste and without delay, vehicle after vehicle rolled up the sloping platform. Guns and gun carriages, communications wagons, administrative wagons, the smithy, field kitchens, and light transport. I still remember how we shook our heads when we received the first local wagon, back when we were still in Kulm. It was the kind of vehicle with a lattice-sided body, the sort peasants use to haul hay. We painted the vehicle gray to make it look at least a little like a military vehicle, but we were always ashamed of it, and we had to trail along at the very back of the column like some kind of gypsy wagon. But what about today? Today, all the movable property of a huge army is loaded almost exclusively onto such carts. The tall wagons on which the French once hauled fodder have long been forgotten. The wagons we have now are even smaller. They're pitiful, shabby little spring-suspended two-wheelers. But they can plow through any impassable mud, and if they get stuck up to their axles, a pair of horses can easily pull them out. With a hearty 1, 2, lift, the artillerymen can hoist a loaded wagon and set it back in place. Next, the horses were led up the sloped ramp, 5 pairs at a time onto the open freight platform. Everything went smoothly. Our battery is an old, experienced crew. And we rolled westward. In R, we saw trains loaded with new cannons and agricultural machinery, the instruments of war and peace. After all the destruction, the hand of the owner was already evident here. Even at the smallest stations, there was a semblance of a garden with grass, trees, and paths. And even where half a house had been demolished, infantrymen were creating their own little gardens and lawns in front of the house. We were moving along a corridor within range of enemy batteries. Once, we saw 2 black, mushroom-shaped columns of explosions 200 meters from the tracks. But because of the noise of the train, we could barely hear the sounds of the blasts. Sometime at dawn, we heard the roar of a dive-bombing plane, but it was carrying out a raid somewhere off to the side. A short time later, Feldwebel-Weisse boarded the train. Upon meeting Sergeant Conrad, he asked him, "Is anything happening?" "Absolutely nothing," replied Conrad, "except that last night we repelled yet another attack, 1,000 rounds of medium-caliber fire. That's about it." Half an hour later, the sergeant major happened to be at the division's temporary headquarters and heard the following there. "What a fantastic story! The Russians have broken through with tanks and motorized infantry. 2,000 shells have been fired at our sector, but the 11th and 12th batteries achieved good results." That's how a piece of news can be blown out of proportion in geometric progression, depending on the distance in miles from the front line. We proceeded to the end of the corridor, so to speak, to the tip of one finger, toward which another finger reaches in an effort to close the ring. The distance between them is about 80 kilometers. But the enemy won't be able to take much advantage of it. The terrain isn't conducive to that. It's barren and monotonous. As far as the eye can see, nothing but steppe with low-growing trees and mixed forests. The pitiful little villages on the hills look even more desolate in the rain, as black as the marshes on which they stand. Even on a hill, if you dig with a shovel, water immediately seeps out of the wet, black, marshy soil. Vehicles get deeply bogged down in the marshes, and we have to harness 4 horses to each wagon. They say the Russians have to carry their ammunition 30 kilometers on foot. At least we have a railroad, instead of having to haul everything on our backs. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now, everyone. See you next time.